Welcome to my channel, my friend. Let me ask you a question. Can love change a king's life? Can love be more powerful than a crown? Today, I will tell you a true story. A story of one man who had everything: power, money, a palace, but gave it all away for love. Would you do the same? Comment below. Have you ever felt that love is more important than everything else? Stay with me, because this story will open your heart, teach you English, and show you what real love means. Chapter 1. A Lonely Child. He was born a prince. His name was Edward. The world said, one day he will be king. But Edward did not feel special. He did not feel happy. He felt alone. His father was a strong man. His name was King George. He was tall and proud. But he was not kind. He did not smile. He did not like children. Sometimes, when Edward spoke too much, his father said, "Why is this boy always talking? He's too noisy. Be quiet." That hurt Edward's heart. His mother was Queen Mary. She looked beautiful on the outside, but inside, she was cold. When Edward cried, she did not come close. She did not hold his hand. She said, "It does not matter if a child is happy or sad. A child must be quiet and strong." But Edward was only a boy. He needed love. He needed care. They lived in a palace. It had 600 rooms, many bathrooms, many kitchens, many sitting rooms. But Edward had no place to feel safe. His room was big, but cold. His world was full of gold and empty of warmth. He had no brothers near him, no sisters to play with. Just walls. Just silence. One night, he remembered something strange. The family was waiting for dinner. The cook sent the food, but it got lost in the palace. It took 20 minutes. His father got angry. He went to find it. And when he did, the woman carrying the food said, "I'm sorry. I forgot where to go. This house is so big." Edward laughed when he told that story. But at that time, it was not funny. It showed how lost everyone was, even the people inside the palace. Edward did not go to school like normal children. He stayed in the palace. A teacher came only for him. His name was Mr. Hansel. He had a red nose and never smiled. He gave Edward boring books. No pictures, just words. So many words. Edward looked out of the window. He dreamed. He thought about sunshine, not sentences. But Mr. Hansel did not like dreamers. He took a stick and hit Edward on the arm. "Look at the book," he shouted. Not the sky. Edward's arm turned red. His heart turned quiet. Every Friday, Edward had to go to his father. The teacher came too. The king asked, "What has my son learned this week?" And Mr. Hansel always said, "Not much, sir. He does not listen. He does not work." Then the king looked at Edward. His eyes were sharp. "What is wrong with you?" he asked. "Are you stupid? Why can't you learn like other boys?" Edward wanted to cry, but he could not. Crying was weak, and a king must be strong. So he said, "Sir, the lessons are boring, and Mr. Hansel hurts me." The king did not care. He said, "You are soft. You will never be a good king. Go to your room, and stay there until morning." And so Edward went to his room. Every day felt the same. Long hours. No play. No joy. Just quiet walls and sad thoughts. He had no friends. No one to talk to. No one to run with in the garden. He had toys, but they were not alive. He had clothes, but they gave no warmth. Later in life, Edward wrote about those days. He said, "I lived in the most beautiful house in England. But I was lonely. I was always lonely. I saw my mother only at dinner. I saw my father 3 or 4 times a week. But they never hugged me. They never said, I love you. Everything I did felt wrong. I was afraid all the time. Imagine that. You have everything. Castles, crowns, money. But you don't have love. You don't have someone to say, you're doing well. You don't have arms around you when you cry. Edward was a child, but he carried a heavy heart. People saw a future king, but inside, he was just a boy who wanted to be seen. Just a boy who wanted to be understood. He asked himself every night, why doesn't anyone care how I feel? He listened to the silence. It was louder than any shout. It told him, be strong. Be silent. Be perfect. But he was not perfect. He was human. And humans need love more than gold. More than thrones. More than a crown. That is where his story begins. Not with power. Not with joy. But with pain. The kind of pain you carry when the world claps for you, but no one holds your hand. This pain stayed with Edward for a long time. It shaped him. It made him soft inside. It made him listen to people. It made him kind. It made him look for love everywhere. In smiles, in simple words, in the eyes of someone who tells the truth. One day, he would find that love. But first, he had to survive this silence, this palace of loneliness, this life with no laughter. He was a child with a crown, but no comfort, a boy in golden clothes, but with no warm hugs. And that is why, later, when love came into his life, he knew it was the most precious thing of all, because he had lived without it. And now, he would never let it go. Chapter 2. The Prince of Wales. Edward was now 16. He was not a child anymore. He was growing taller. His face was changing. His eyes were softer, but they also carried sadness. He wanted freedom. He wanted to walk in the streets. He wanted to feel like a real person. But the world around him only saw one thing, the next king. One day, his father called him to his room. It was spring. The sun was shining outside. But Edward's heart felt cold. He knew his father never called him just to talk. Something serious was coming. Edward, the king said, next month you will become the Prince of Wales. You must be ready. Edward looked at the floor. He did not smile. His father walked to a cupboard. He opened the door and pulled out some clothes. These are for the ceremony, he said. Edward looked at them, and his eyes filled with tears. The shoes were soft. The clothes looked like a skirt. The crown was small and gold. But it looked heavy to Edward. Father, he said slowly, I'm 16. I can't wear this. These clothes, they make me look like a girl. Why can't I dress like a normal person? His father's voice was sharp. Because you are not a normal person. You are the future king. You are different. You are special. But Edward did not feel special. He felt trapped. He felt like a puppet in a play he didn't choose. He cried. Not once, not twice, but for 2 whole days. The crown was not a gift. It was a weight. Then the day of the ceremony came, the 10th of June, 1911. The family traveled to a big castle in North Wales. The castle was old and cold. Music was playing. People were dancing. Cameras were flashing. Crowds were waiting outside. Edward stood still as his father placed the gold crown on his head. Everyone was smiling. Everyone was clapping. But Edward felt sick. He closed his eyes. I feel terrible, he whispered. Can we go home now? His father didn't listen. Not yet, he said. The people want to see you. You must wave. You must smile. So Edward walked slowly to the front of the castle. He looked down at the people. There were hundreds, maybe thousands. They were cheering. They were full of hope. They wanted to see a happy prince. But what they saw was a scared boy with red cheeks, and shaking hands. "Smile, Edward," the king said again. "You are happy." But Edward was not happy. He felt like he was in a dream, but not a good one. A dream where he had no voice. A dream where everyone expected him to wear the crown and say nothing. After a few more hours, the family returned to their home in Windsor. It was a long drive. The sun was setting. The sky was pink and orange. It was quiet in the car. Edward sat by the window. He took off his soft shoes and looked out. He thought about the people. He thought about the music. He thought about the cold gold crown on his head. He said nothing, but inside his heart, he made a promise to himself. Never again, he thought. Never again will I pretend. Never again will I smile when I want to cry. Never again will I wear something I hate just because others say I must. One day, I will choose. I will choose my life. I will choose my happiness. But that day was still far away. Right now, he was just a prince with tired eyes and a heavy heart. The world saw him and said, "What a lucky boy." But they did not know. They did not see the boy who cried for 2 days because of a skirt. They did not see the boy who looked out the window and dreamed of being free. They did not hear the small voice inside him that said, "Is this really my life?" They only saw the title, Prince of Wales. But Edward didn't want the title. He wanted truth. He wanted love. He wanted something real. He did not hate his father, but he could not be like him. His father was strong, but hard. His father was brave, but cold. His father wore the crown, but forgot how to smile. Edward did not want that life. He wanted something different. He didn't know what it was yet, but deep in his heart, he was waiting for it, waiting for something warm, waiting for someone who would look at him, not as a prince, not as a king, but as a man, as a soul, as a person who feels too much and cries in silence. He had the crown, but he still did not have what he really needed. And that is why this chapter ends not with joy, but with a thought that would follow Edward for years. What is the use of power if you are not free to be yourself? Chapter 3, The Royal Star. Edward was now older. His face looked calm, but his heart still had many storms inside. He had gone to Oxford. He had read books. He had taken lessons. But he still did not feel wise. He did not feel strong. He did not feel ready. He did not know what kind of king he would be. He only knew this. He did not want to be like his father. Cold, silent, far away from people. Edward wanted to feel the world. He wanted to meet real people. He wanted to live, not just wear a crown and sit in a chair. And then, the war began. It was called the Great War. Later, we would call it World War I. So many young men went to fight. So many never came back. Edward said, "I must go too. I must see with my own eyes. I must learn what life really is." He did not stay in the palace. He did not hide in gold rooms. He joined the soldiers. He lived in a house with 25 men. He slept on a simple bed. He ate simple food. He walked in mud. He heard the sounds of guns. He smelled blood and fire. But something strange happened. He felt more alive than ever before. The other soldiers did not treat him like a prince. They treated him like a man. At night, they sat around the table and talked. They talked about their mothers, their homes, their wives, their jobs, their hopes. Edward listened. Edward spoke. Edward laughed. And slowly, his heart started to heal. He felt like a person, not a puppet, not a symbol, not a boy in a box, but a person who could smile and be smiled at, a person who could laugh and not be punished, a person who could be free, even just for a few minutes. But war is not only stories and smiles. War is also paying. One day, in 1916, Edward's driver took him to a town in Belgium. The name of the town was Loos. It was cold. The sky was gray. The streets were broken. Edward walked up a hill and looked down. He saw men running. He saw smoke. He saw fire. He heard shouting. He heard crying. He saw young faces full of fear. And suddenly, he felt very small. He was a prince. But what did that mean here? Nothing. He could not stop the war. He could not save the soldiers. He could only watch. And remember, after 1 hour, he walked back to the car. But something was wrong. The driver was not there. Edward came closer. The man was sitting very still. Too still. Edward opened the door. The man had been shot. The bullet went into his neck. He had died waiting. He had died silently. Edward stood there. He did not cry. But inside, something broke. The man was alive 1 hour ago. Now he was gone. That is war. One moment you speak. The next moment, you are silent forever. When the war ended in 1918, Edward came home. The palace was the same. The golden walls. The big chairs. The quiet dinners. But Edward was different now. His heart was full of new thoughts. He had seen death. He had seen pain. He had seen real people with real problems. And he could not forget them. One night, he sat with his father at dinner. The fire was warm, but the room was cold. Edward looked into the flames and spoke softly. "I don't understand," he said. "The war is finished. But the world is still sad. There are still so many poor people. So many hungry. So many lost. Why? Can't we do something?" His father did not smile. But he answered in a serious voice. "You cannot change the world by sitting near the fire," he said. "You must go out. You must travel. You must meet people. You must listen. And then, maybe, when you are king, you will know what to do." And Edward listened. For once, he agreed with his father. He stood up. He packed his things. And he left England. For 5 years, Edward traveled around the world. He did not go to just 1 or 2 places. He went far. He went wide. He saw mountains. He saw deserts. He saw cities and villages. He walked through crowds. He saw smiles and tears. He went to 45 countries and traveled more than 240,000 kilometers. In India, he saw the heat, the colors, the crowds. In Nigeria, he saw children playing in the street. In Argentina, he saw the joy of dancing and music. In Japan, he saw calm faces and quiet beauty. In Canada, 500,000 people waited to see him. In Cape Town, 190,000. In Paris, 300,000. In New York, 500,000. In Melbourne, 750,000. People waited hours just to see his face, to shake his hand, to hear his voice. Edward did not sit in the car. He stepped out. He walked with the people. He smiled. He laughed. He touched their hands. And the people loved him. They said, "This prince is different." They said, "He is not cold like the others." They said, "He listens. He speaks. He cares." One newspaper wrote, "Edward is the first royal star. He is the most famous man in the world." The old kings were quiet and proud. But Edward is warm. He laughs. He jokes. He speaks to everyone, young or old, rich or poor. And that was true. Edward had changed. He was no longer just the lonely boy in the palace. He was the prince who saw the world, who touched the hands of people, who remembered their names, who asked about their families. He still carried sadness in his heart. But now, he also carried something new: love for people. Not just one person, but all people. Still, the empty feeling was not gone. He had met millions. He had heard many stories. But when he went back to his room, he was still alone. He looked at the mirror. He saw a man who was loved by the world, but had no one to love at night. The crowds gave him joy, but not comfort. The hands he shook gave him smiles, but not warmth. He had learned what the world was. He had seen pain and beauty. But deep inside, his question stayed the same. Will I ever be loved not as a prince, but just as Edward? He did not know it yet, but love was coming. Chapter 4. The Meeting. It was autumn. The sky was gray. The wind was strong. The leaves were falling. Edward was tired. He had been traveling for many years. He had met many people. He had shaken many hands. He had smiled and laughed for the crowd. But when he came home, he was still lonely. He was still that same boy from the cold palace. The boy who had no one to love. The boy who had no one to hold. One weekend, his friends invited him to their country house. Their names were Lord and Lady Furness. It was a big house. Quiet. Peaceful. Edward liked to go there. There were horses and gardens. But this weekend, the weather was bad. It rained all day. There was no riding. No walking. So they stayed inside. They had lunch early. Some guests came. New people. People Edward had never met before. Then, at 1 o'clock, a woman arrived. Her name was Mrs. Wallace Simpson. She came with her husband. She wore a beautiful dress. Her smile was calm and bright. Her eyes were strong. Her face looked honest. She did not act nervous. She did not try to please the prince. She was just herself. Edward watched her. She spoke with Lord Furness for a few minutes. Then Lady Furness brought her closer. "Sir, this is one of my dear friends," she said. "Mrs. Wallace Simpson." Edward looked at her. He said, "How do you do, Mrs. Simpson? Please sit down." She sat. Lady Furness left. And now they were alone. The room was quiet. There were flowers on the table. The windows showed the falling rain. Wallace looked tired. She had a cold. Her eyes were red. Edward noticed. "Our English houses are not warm enough," he said. "We don't have American heating here." She looked at him, not with fear, but with honesty. She said, "You have disappointed me, sir." Edward blinked. "Why is that?" he asked. "Because everyone asks me the same thing. They all say, 'We don't have heating like America.'" I thought the Prince of Wales would speak about something more interesting. Edward laughed. Really laughed. Not like a prince. Like a man. Like a child who finally heard something real. Wallace looked confused. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," Edward said. "You said the truth. That is rare." She said, "But why is that funny? Don't people always tell the truth?" Edward shook his head. "No, not to me. If I say the sky is yellow, they say, 'Yes, sir.' If I say Scotland is bigger than Canada, they say, 'Yes, sir.' If I say Monday is the last day of the week, they say, 'Yes, sir.' But you just told me I was boring. And I like that." Wallace laughed too. Then she looked down at Edward's pants and shoes. "Can I say one more thing?" she asked. "Yes, Mrs. Simpson. Say anything. It's your trousers. They're black. Your shoes are brown. These colors don't match. They look funny together." Edward stood up and looked in the mirror. "You are right," he said. "I look very strange. Next time we meet, I will dress better." After that, they went to lunch. There was a big table. Many people. Wallace sat far from Edward, but he kept watching her. She laughed with Lady Furness. She moved her hands when she spoke. Her fingers were long and beautiful. Her voice was soft but strong. Then, for a moment, she looked at Edward and smiled. That smile went straight into his heart. It was not just a nice smile. It was a real smile. And Edward felt warm. He had not felt that in years. After lunch, Wallace stood up. "We have to leave now," she said. "There is another party in London." Edward wanted to stop her. He wanted to say something. But he did not know what to say. He stood there, quiet. They shook hands. Her fingers touched his palm. Then she walked away. He sat down next to Lady Furness. "Tell me about Mrs. Simpson," he said. "What do you want to know?" she asked. "Everything," he said. Lady Furness smiled. "Then come walk with me in the garden. I can speak more freely there." They walked slowly under the trees. The rain had stopped, but the leaves were wet. The garden was quiet. Edward listened. And Lady Furness began to tell him Wallace's story. Edward did not know it then. But this moment, this meeting, would change his life. Forever. Edward did not sleep well that night. He thought about her eyes. He thought about her voice. He thought about her courage. She was not afraid to speak the truth. She did not pretend. She did not say, "Yes, sir," to every word. She looked at him like a man. Not a prince. Not a king. Just a man. And Edward, for the first time, felt seen. He remembered that feeling the next day. And the next. And the next. He saw many women before. Beautiful. Perfect. But they all looked at the crown, not the heart. They wanted the title. They wanted the power. They wanted the fairy tale. But Wallace did not want any of that. She told the truth. She laughed at his clothes. She smiled with real eyes. She was not a dream. She was not a painting. She was alive. And something inside Edward whispered, "This woman is different. This woman is real." He had no plan. He had no big idea. But he knew he wanted to see her again. That was the beginning. The beginning of a story not of power, but of love. Chapter 5, Wallace. After that weekend, Edward could not stop thinking about her. Her face stayed in his mind. Her smile was clear. Her voice was strong. Her words were still in his ears. He remembered how she looked at him. Not like a prince. Not like a king. She looked at him like a person. He had met thousands of people. But no one ever made him feel like that before. He wanted to know more. He wanted to understand who she was. And he wanted to see her again. Not as a royal duty. Not as a guest. But as a man who felt something for a woman who was different from the rest of the world. He went to Lady Furness and asked her to tell him more. Lady Furness smiled. She had seen the spark in Edward's eyes. She knew what he was feeling, even before he could say it. So she began to share the story of Wallace Simpson. Her life was not easy, Lady Furness said. She was born in Baltimore, in the United States. She never saw her father. He died when she was just a baby. Her mother raised her alone. It was not a rich life. But her mother was full of strength. She gave Wallace love. She gave her values. She gave her hope. Wallace grew up like many other girls. But there was always something special about her. She was bold. She was curious. She asked questions. She did not wait quietly in the corner. She wanted to live a full life. She wanted to travel. She wanted to see the world. She wanted more than just dresses and dinners. She wanted to feel alive. When she turned 20, she married a man named Winfield Spencer. At first, things were good. They laughed. They dreamed. They traveled. But life is not always kind. One day, Winfield lost money in the street. It was not much, but it changed everything. He came home angry. Very angry. He drank. He shouted. And then he hit her. Edward listened in silence. He looked at the ground. He closed his eyes. He could almost feel the pain Wallace must have felt that night. It was not just the hand that hurt. It was the fear, the confusion, the betrayal. When someone who says, "I love you," also says, "You're my prisoner," the heart breaks in a very deep way. He hit her in the face, Lady Furness said softly. She was bleeding. She was shaking, and he dragged her up the stairs and locked her in the bathroom. She cried all night. The next morning, she left. She went back to her family. She said, "I can't live like this. I want a divorce." Edward felt his chest tighten. Wallace had lived through something so dark, and yet she smiled so brightly. She spoke with courage. She looked at the world with clear eyes. He respected her even more. After the divorce, Wallace met another man, Ernest Simpson. He was kind. He was calm. They got married. They moved to London. They had a nice flat. Life was quiet. But something was missing. Maybe love. Maybe connection. Maybe joy. No one knows for sure. But when Wallace and Edward began to see each other again and again, at parties, at dinners, at small events, something started to grow. Something soft. Something slow. Something strong. Edward said later. She understood life. She was not like the woman I usually met. She was real. She talked about books, about art, about pain, about dreams. And I started to open my heart to her. We had no secrets. I told her everything. I had never done that with anyone before. And Wallace, too, started to feel something. She once said, his eyes were always a little sad. And sometimes, he looked like a child who wanted to be held, a child who needed a friend. He didn't have close people in his life. Maybe people were afraid of him. But I wasn't. I saw the soft part of him. And when he spoke to me, something inside me jumped. I wanted to be near him. But I also knew he was the Prince of Wales. That kind of love can be dangerous. Their connection grew slowly. It was not a fairy tale. It was not fast or loud. It was two people who had been lonely for too long. Two people who knew pain. Two people who did not want to wear masks anymore. They met again and again. They laughed. They walked. They sat in quiet rooms. They listened. They looked into each other's eyes. And something unspoken passed between them. In June of 1933, Edward gave a birthday party for Wallace. It was small, but every detail was perfect. The music, the food, the flowers. It was not a royal event. It was not for show. It was from his heart. And Wallace felt it. She saw it. She understood what he was saying without words. I see you. I care for you. I want you close. After that, Edward started to visit the Simpsons' flat more and more. Almost every day, he came with books, with music, with thoughts. He wanted to be around her, not just when the world was watching, but when the world was quiet. Then, one day, he invited Wallace and her husband to go skiing in Austria. But Ernest said, "I have business in America. I can't come. But maybe Wallace and her aunt can join you." That trip changed everything. Wallace later wrote, "We went to Austria as friends. But when we came back, we were in love. It was like a dream. I didn't expect it. I didn't plan it. But it happened." Edward had found what he was looking for. Not a princess. Not a queen. Not someone perfect. But someone who spoke the truth. Someone who had lived. Someone who had survived pain and still smiled. Someone who did not care about the crown, only about the person who wore it. And he knew, deep inside, that his life could never be the same again. Chapter 6. The King is Dead. Long live the King. It was winter. The year was 1936. Edward was tired. He had been living in London, smiling for the public, laughing at parties, walking with friends. But inside, he felt far away from all of it. His heart was somewhere else. It was not in the palace. It was not in the crown. It was with Wallace. Every day he thought of her. Every morning, he wanted to see her face. Every evening, he missed her voice. But he also needed time away from the noise. So he left the city and went to Windsor Castle. He wanted to rest. He wanted to ride horses and feel the quiet wind on his face. But the peace did not last long. One afternoon, a phone call came. It was from his mother, Queen Mary. Her voice was quiet. Her words were slow. "Edward," she said, "you must return home at once. Your father is not well. I believe he is dying." Edward did not speak. For a moment, he just held the phone. He listened to the silence between his mother's breaths. Then he said, "I'll come now." He got into the car. The sky was gray. The roads were wet. The trees had no leaves. Everything felt heavy. When he arrived at the palace, the servants opened the door quickly. No one said much. No one needed to. Everyone already knew. The king was dying. Edward went upstairs. The halls were quiet. The lights were low. He walked slowly to his father's room. The door opened. The air was still. He saw the old man lying in bed, pale and weak. His eyes were closed. His chest moved gently, up and down. Edward walked to the bed and sat down. He took his father's hand. It felt cold. It felt thin. Edward bent down and kissed his father's face. The king opened his eyes for just a second. He looked at his son. His lips moved. His voice was small, like a whisper in the wind. "Be a good king, Edward, and be good to your mother." Edward nodded. His own eyes were full of tears. He said, "Yes, father, I will." The king closed his eyes again. His hand grew still. His chest stopped moving. And just after midnight, King George V died. Everything changed in that moment. Edward did not speak. He did not cry. He stood up and looked at the body of the man who had once called him weak, who had never said, "I love you," who had never held him close. But now he was gone, and Edward was king. His mother stood beside him. She took his hand and kissed it. "My child," she said softly, "you are now the king. God be with you." His brothers came, one by one. They did not say much. They each kissed his hand and said the old words, the royal words. "The king is dead. Long live the king." But Edward was not thinking about those words. His thoughts were not in that room. He walked out slowly. He went downstairs. He picked up the telephone, and he called Wallace. "My father is dead," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry," Wallace answered. Her voice was full of love. "I have to stay here for now," Edward said. "But listen to me. Nothing will change. You are mine. I love you more than ever. And you will be my queen." There was silence. Then Wallace said, "Let's not speak of that tonight. You must be with your family." But Edward answered, "No. You are my family. You are everything to me. Good night, Wallace. Sleep well." He put the phone down. He looked out of the window. The sky was dark. The stars were hidden. His heart was full of sadness, full of memory, full of love, and also full of fear. Because Wallace was not a princess. She was not from a royal family. She was not the woman the palace wanted. Edward knew this. And now he was king. But what would the world say about her? Wallace sat alone that night in her quiet room. The lights were low. The walls felt close. She touched her hands together. She closed her eyes. She thought of Edward's voice. She thought of his words. "You will be my queen. and she felt afraid. "He is king now," she whispered. "But what will happen to me?" The days passed. People wore black clothes. The streets were quiet. England was sad. Their king was gone. A new king was here. The newspapers showed Edward's face. The radio spoke his name. He was handsome. He was kind. He was popular. The people loved him. But no one knew his heart. No one knew that in his heart there was only one woman. And she was not a princess. She was not approved. She was divorced. And she was American. Still, Edward did not care. He walked with pride. He stood tall. He spoke clearly. But each night, he missed Wallace. He called her. He wrote to her. He dreamed of her. And he waited for the moment he could say it to the world. "This is the woman I love. This is the woman I will marry." But many people were already watching. And not all of them were kind. The palace had its rules. The church had its laws. The country had its opinions. And love would soon be tested. Edward was now king. But the battle for his heart was only just beginning. Chapter 7. The Church. The new king stood tall, but inside, he was not strong. His mind was full of questions. His heart was full of love. He thought about Wallace all the time. When he woke up, he wanted to hear her voice. When he walked into a room, he wished she was there. When he sat alone in the evening, he thought about her smile. She had become part of his life. Not just a visitor. Not just a friend. She was the woman he wanted. She was the one he loved. And in his mind, there was no doubt. He wanted to marry her. But there was one problem. Wallace was not free. She was married to Ernest Simpson. Their marriage was quiet, cold, almost over. But on paper, she was still his wife. Edward waited. He watched. He hoped. And then, one morning, a letter arrived. It was from Wallace. She had written to her husband. Her words were kind but clear. "Dear Ernest," she wrote, "you are a good man. You have always treated me well. But I must tell you something. I am in love with the king. My heart belongs to him now. Our marriage is over. I want a divorce. Please do not be angry. I will never forget you. But I must be free." Edward read the letter again and again. He could not believe it. His heart felt light. He walked around the room. He smiled. Now, he thought, nothing can stop us. He held the letter like a treasure. But there was another letter coming. A darker one. And it came the very next morning. The king came down to breakfast. The sun was rising. The palace was quiet. But one man was waiting in the dining room. He was not a friend. He was not smiling. He was the Archbishop of Canterbury. His name was Mr. Gordon Lang. He held a small black bag and 3 newspapers in his hand. Edward looked at him. "Good morning, Mr. Lang. What brings you here so early?" The Archbishop said nothing at first. Then he opened the newspapers and showed them to the king. "I came to speak about Mrs. Wallace Simpson," he said slowly. "The world is reading these stories. They say you want to marry her. Are these stories true?" Edward looked at him without fear. "Yes," he said. "They are true. Wallace will be my wife." The Archbishop shook his head. "That is not possible. You are the king. You are also the head of the Church of England. And the Church does not allow this. Mrs. Simpson has 2 living husbands. Divorce is wrong in the eyes of God." Edward did not raise his voice. He did not argue with anger. But he looked into the eyes of the Archbishop and asked a question. "May I ask you something about God, Mr. Lang?" "Yes, sir," the Archbishop replied. "Is God happy when 2 people fall in love?" "Yes, sir. And is God happy when those 2 people decide to get married?" "Yes, sir. But And is God happy when they live together in peace and joy for the rest of their lives? Yes, sir. But then, said Edward, Wallace and I will make God very happy. We are in love. We want to marry. And we will be happy. The Archbishop stayed quiet. Then he spoke again. I beg you, sir. Think carefully. The church will be against you. The people may also turn away. You must choose someone else. You must walk away from this woman. Edward stood up. His voice was calm, but his face was hard. That is not possible, he said. When Wallace is free, I shall marry her. The Archbishop lowered his eyes. He closed the newspapers. He placed them back in his bag. Then he stood to leave. But before he went, he touched the king's arm gently. Please, sir, he said again, think one more time. You are not just a man. You are the king. The world is watching. And the church is very strong. We will never accept this woman as our queen. Edward looked out the window. The light was rising over the trees. Birds were singing outside. But the room felt cold. I don't care, he said softly. I have God in my heart. I have love in my soul. That is enough for me. The Archbishop turned and left. Edward stood alone. His hands were shaking slightly. But he was not afraid. Not anymore. Because for the first time in his life, he had made his own choice. He would not follow the church. He would not follow the old rules. He would follow love. That night, Edward walked in the garden. The moon was full. The stars were bright. He looked at the sky and whispered to himself. How strange, he said. They say I cannot love. They say I cannot be happy. But what kind of king is a king without love? What kind of rule is a rule that kills the heart? He looked up. He thought of Wallace. He missed her voice. He missed her truth. And he knew the storm was coming. The palace would shake. The crown would tremble. But he would stand tall. He would not run. He would not hide. He had chosen love. And he was ready to pay the price. The news spread. The church was not quiet. The leaders were not silent. Whispers filled the air. Some people said he was brave. Some people said he was wrong. But no one could stop it now. The choice was made. The heart had spoken. And the crown was no longer safe. Chapter 8. The Storm. The days after the Archbishop's visit felt calm on the outside. The sky was blue. The wind was soft. People walked through parks. The newspapers showed smiling pictures of Edward. They called him the modern king. The people's king. The king of style. But under all the smiles, a storm was growing. It did not come from the sky. It came from behind closed doors. It came from long meetings. From quiet whispers in dark rooms. It came from the old voices, the church, the family, the government. All of them were speaking. All of them were saying one thing. This cannot happen. But Edward did not care. He smiled. He walked through his garden. He sent letters to Wallace. He picked flowers and thought of her. He looked at the sun and said to himself, she will be mine. We are close now. Very close. He wanted to take her away for a little time. Just a short holiday. Far from all the eyes. Far from the pressure. Far from the noise. So he planned a journey. A quiet trip across the Mediterranean Sea. He and Wallace sailed through warm waters. They laughed. They walked on soft sand. They ate dinners under the stars. They met leaders and kings in other countries. They spoke with the Prime Minister of Greece. They visited Ataturk in Turkey. They saw King Boris in Bulgaria. But Edward was not focused on politics. He did not want to talk about power. He wanted to hold Wallace's hand. He wanted to sit with her, with no crown on his head, with no weight on his shoulders, just as a man with a woman. A man who had found love and wanted to keep it. One afternoon, the sun was hot. Edward took off his shirt. He wanted to feel the sun on his skin. He lay back in a chair. He closed his eyes. For the first time in weeks, he felt peace. But he did not see the man hiding behind the wall. A young photographer was there. With a camera. Quiet. Quick. He took a photo of the king. No shirt, no socks, no tie, and sent it to the newspapers. The photo went everywhere. When Edward came back to London, there was a letter waiting for him. It was from an ordinary man. Not a politician. Not a priest. Just a citizen. His name was Mr. Albert Thompson. He lived in Birmingham. He wrote, "Dear Sir, I saw a picture of you in the newspaper this morning, and I felt sad. I have never seen a king dressed like that before. No shirt, no tie, no hat, no socks, just short trousers. You look like a boy on the beach. But you are not a boy. You are the king, and I expected more from you." Edward smiled at the letter. Then he laughed. Then he threw it into the fire. He said, "Let people talk. I want to be real. I want to be human." But that fire was not small. That fire had started to spread. People in power were watching, and they were not smiling. Soon after, the Prime Minister, Mr. Stanley Baldwin, came to see Edward. He was polite, but serious. He did not smile. He did not bring good news. "Sir," he said, "you want to be modern. But the people don't like it. They want a king who follows tradition. And they are also reading about Mrs. Simpson." Edward looked at him. "And what do you think?" he asked. Mr. Baldwin sat down slowly. He looked tired. He looked worried. "She has been married twice," he said. "Her first husband is alive. Her second husband is still your friend. You must understand what that means. The law is clear. The church is firm. You cannot marry her and remain king." Edward stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the garden. He thought of Wallace picking flowers. He thought of her laugh, her eyes, her voice. "I cannot live without her," he said. The Prime Minister said nothing for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Then there is a storm coming." The words were simple, but heavy. They filled the room. Edward did not speak. He knew what was coming. He had felt it in the wind. He had seen it in the eyes of his mother, in the hands of the church, in the soft warnings of his friends. He knew that love would cost him. That night, Edward sat with the Prime Minister for many hours. They talked. They argued. They listened. They did not agree. There were many questions. But at the end, there was only one answer. One truth. And Edward spoke it clearly. "You say she cannot marry a king. Then I will not be king. I will give the crown to my brother. I will walk away. I will leave this country. I must follow my heart. You tell me it's a crime to love. You tell me it's wrong to be happy. What a strange world we live in." He picked up the phone. He called Wallace. His voice was quiet. "The Prime Minister says a storm is coming," he said. "So I want you to leave. Go to France. I will call you soon." Wallace said goodbye. She packed her bags. She stepped onto a boat. She watched the land disappear behind her, and her heart felt heavy. Edward went to his mother next. He entered the room slowly. She was sitting near the window. Her face was hard. Her eyes were cold. She did not look at him with love. She looked at him with disbelief. "Do you understand what you are doing?" she asked. "Look outside that window. There are 400 million people who call you king. They trust you. They need you. And now you will leave it all for that woman." Edward's voice was soft, but his words were clear. "Yes, mother. I love her." The queen stood up. "Love," she said. "You are the king. You must love your people. You must love your duty." Edward looked down. But I am also a man, he said, and I can't pretend anymore. She did not hug him. She did not cry. She only turned away. Go, she said. But know this. When you leave, you lose more than a crown. You lose your family. You lose your country. You lose everything. That night, Edward called Winston Churchill, his old friend. His voice shook. I have some sad news, he said. I am leaving England. I am never coming back. George will be king. Churchill was shocked. No, sir, he said. You are free. You must fight. Edward said, I've seen war. I don't want to fight again. Churchill said, but the people love you. Edward looked at the floor. Perhaps, but love is not enough for them. It is enough for me. Chapter 9. The Woman I Love. The day was quiet, but Edward's heart was not. He stood near the window of Buckingham Palace and looked down at the streets. They were full. People stood shoulder to shoulder. They held signs. Some were crying. Some were singing. Some were just silent, looking up. One voice shouted through the dark. Edward, we love you. Another shouted, Long live the king. And again, long live love. Inside the palace, the rooms were still. But Edward could feel the voices reaching him. They came through the walls, through the windows, into his chest, into his heart. He put his hand on the glass and whispered to himself, Why is this happening? What have I done wrong? The door opened. It was Winston Churchill. Edward turned around and tried to smile. But the smile was weak. It did not stay. He walked slowly to the table and sat down. This is my last night in England, he said. The last night in the only home I've ever known. Churchill said nothing. He understood. Edward stood up again. He walked to the window. His face was tired. His shoulders were low. But his voice was still calm. I love this country. I wanted to be a good king. Not just a man with gold on his head. I wanted to help people. I wanted to change things. But they stopped me. All of them. The church, the palace, the government. They care more about rules than love. He turned back to Churchill, and his eyes were red. They say I cannot marry her. They say she is wrong. But she is the only person who has ever made me feel alive. The only one who sees me. The only one who tells me the truth. Churchill moved closer. The people outside love you, sir, he said. They want you to stay. They want her to be queen. Edward smiled sadly. It's too late, he said. I made my decision. I will not be a king without love. That is not a life I want. That is not a life I can live. The clock ticked. The night grew darker. Then the phone rang in Edward's room. It was early morning now. A voice said, Sir, they are ready for you. Edward put on his coat. He walked down the long hallway. Every step was heavy. His footsteps echoed. He passed old paintings, old chairs, old memories. He passed the room where he ate dinner as a child. He passed the stairs where he once sat alone, listening to silence. He was not that boy anymore. He was a man, and he was walking toward the end of something big. The family waited in the next room. His mother sat by the window. Her face was hard. His brother stood beside her. No one smiled. No one spoke. On a small table, there was a paper. Just one paper. But it carried the weight of a kingdom. Edward walked over. He sat down. He read the words slowly. He did not shake. He did not cry. I, Edward the Eighth, King of Great Britain, King of India, King of Australia, King of New Zealand, King of Canada, King of Kenya, King of Nigeria, King of Burma, King of Malaya, King of Singapore, and King of 32 other countries, have today given the crown to my brother George. God be with him and all his people. December 10th, 1936. He took the pen. He wrote his name, the name of a king. And then, no longer a king. He stood up. He walked to his brother. He took his hand and kissed it. George looked at him. I never wanted this to happen, he said. This is the worst day of my life. Edward gave a small nod. Mine too. Then he walked to his mother. She did not open her arms. She did not rise from the chair. Her voice was like stone. Before I kiss you, she said, there are things I must say. I have never understood you. You were born to rule, but you ran away like a child. This morning you were a king. Tonight, you are just a man running from duty, from history, from family. Edward lowered his head. You think you are free, she said. But you are not. No one is free without their roots, without their people, without their name. She paused. Her voice became softer. I love you. I am your mother. That will never change. But if you marry that woman, you will break my heart. Edward said nothing. He kissed her hand. And then he turned. And he walked away. The next day, he went to Windsor Castle. There was a radio waiting. A small room. A microphone. A quiet chair. He sat down. He looked at the papers in front of him. And then, he spoke to the world. Tonight, for the first time, I can speak freely. Earlier today, I gave the crown to my brother George. He is now your king. I will leave this country soon. I will travel to France. And I must tell you the reason why. I have found love. And I cannot carry the heavy weight of the crown without the woman I love beside me. My heart is with her. And I cannot live without her. I don't know what will happen next. Maybe I will never see England again. But I ask you to think of me when I sail across the sea. May God be with you. Long live King George. He finished the speech. He stood up. He took off the royal ring. He placed it on the table. He walked to the car. It was raining now. Just a light rain. But the driver said softly, "It's like the sky is crying, sir." Edward smiled. "Maybe it is," he said. The car moved through the streets. At 1:30 a.m., they reached the port at Portsmouth. A ship was waiting. Edward stepped out. A voice said, "The king is here." Edward stopped. He looked at the sea. He looked at the sky. "No," he said softly. "I am not the king. I am just a man in love." And then he stepped onto the ship. Into the night. Into a new life. Chapter 10. The Wedding. The sea was quiet. The sky was pale. The cold wind touched Edward's face as he stood on the deck of the ship. He looked at the water but did not see it. His eyes were lost in thought. His heart was far away. He had just left everything, his crown, his country, his name as king, and now he was alone. No palace, no power, only love. But even love felt distant for a moment. Wallace was not beside him yet. She was still in France. He had given everything for her, and now he waited. Would love be enough? When he arrived in France, the sun was rising. It was a new day, a new life, a life without rules, without orders, without the cold hand of duty, but also a life with no palace walls, no long lines of servants, no guards at the door. He stepped onto the shore. People watched him. Some smiled. Some just stared. He was no longer a king. But he was still a man who had shocked the world. That morning, he picked up the telephone. His hand shook a little. He dialed the number. And when he heard her voice, something inside him softened. He was no longer a prince. No longer a ruler. But he was still hers. "Did you hear me on the radio?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "Of course I did." "And how did you feel?" he whispered. Wallace was silent for a second. Then she spoke, with emotion in every word. I was sitting in my room, alone. I listened to your voice. And I cried. I put my hands over my face. I could not stop the tears. You gave up everything for me. You left your crown. You left your family. You left your whole world. And I love you. I love you more than I can say. With me, you will be the happiest man in the world. Edward smiled. I already am, he said. You are everything I need. You are my home now. The days passed slowly. Edward lived in France, and Wallace stayed nearby. But they did not meet right away. The world was still watching. Newspapers still wrote about them. People still talked in the streets. But Edward did not care. His decision was final. His heart was full. He had chosen love. Now, he just wanted to make it complete. 6 months later, they married. The date was the 3rd of June, 1937. It was a quiet day. No big crowds. No royal family. Not one member came to the wedding. Not his mother. Not his brothers. Not even his nieces or nephews. They stayed away. The crown had rules, and those rules said, do not stand beside him. But Edward did not need a crown. He only needed Wallace. They found a small place for the ceremony. It was simple, calm. The light came through the window softly. Wallace wore a light blue dress. Edward wore a gentle smile. When he looked at her, he saw everything he had given up, and he saw that it was worth it. He held her hand. She looked into his eyes. They said the words. They gave each other their hearts. And with one kiss, they became husband and wife. They were now the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. Wallace was no queen in title, but she was his queen in every other way. After the wedding, Edward sat down and wrote a letter to his brother, King George. I was surprised, he wrote, that no one from the family came. But Wallace is now my wife. That will never change. We live in Paris now, but I still hope to return to England one day. I want to live in Windsor again, not as king, just as a man, with my wife beside me. The letter was sent, and after some days, an answer came. It was short, cold, clear. I'm sorry, Edward. You may return, but Wallace cannot. I do not accept her. I do not like her. She is not welcome in our home. Edward read those words again and again. His hands were still. His face showed no pain. But inside, something closed. Later he said, my brother pushed me away like a dog. I will never forget it. I gave up everything. I asked for one thing, to live peacefully with the woman I love. And they said no. That is when I made my final decision. If they don't want Wallace, then they don't want me. I no longer want them. From that day on, Edward stopped writing to most of his family. The palace no longer existed for him. The queen was no longer his mother. The king was no longer his brother. He had made his choice. He would not go back. He would not look back. He and Wallace made a home in France. A beautiful home, full of light, books, music, flowers, laughter. It was not a palace, but it was full of something Buckingham Palace never had: warmth. They cooked together. They read together. They walked through the garden hand in hand. No more royal rules. No more cool meetings. Just mornings with tea, quiet afternoons, and soft evenings of conversation and dreams. They traveled. They met friends. They smiled for the world, but they lived for each other. They were happy, and when the world called their love strange, they didn't listen, because they knew the truth. They had chosen what many could not. They had chosen real love over titles, feelings over fear, hearts over history. The world kept changing. Kings came and went. Wars rose and ended. New faces appeared in the newspapers, but Edward and Wallace stayed together. Through every year, through every season, through joy and through silence. People asked, was it worth it? And Edward always said the same thing. Yes, every single day. I lost a crown, but I gained a heart. I lost a kingdom, but I found peace. Wallace once whispered to a friend, he gave up the world for me. And in return, I gave him the only thing he ever wanted. To be loved, simply, deeply, and forever. Chapter 11. Paris. Paris was a new beginning. It was not England. It was not home. But it was peaceful. And Edward needed peace. Wallace needed peace. Together, they needed space to breathe, to laugh, to love without fear. In Paris, there were no palace walls. There were no royal rules. There were no men in black suits watching them. In Paris, there were only small streets, quiet cafes, soft lights, and the feeling of freedom. It was not the same life, but it was the right one. They found a house. It was beautiful, but not too big. There were trees around it. Birds sang in the morning. Flowers grew along the windows. The rooms had warm light. There were old books on the shelves. There were soft chairs by the fireplace. They made it their own. Slowly, carefully, with love. Edward did not miss gold furniture. He did not miss the cold, shiny rooms of Buckingham Palace. He had something better now. Comfort, love, laughter. A real home. They gave parties. Small ones. Happy ones. They invited artists, writers, travelers, friends from many countries. Wallace dressed in beautiful clothes. Edward smiled more than ever before. They traveled together. They visited new places. They walked side by side, not as king and queen, but as two people who chose love. They laughed over simple food. They sat under the stars. Sometimes they danced in the living room with no music, just because they could. No one told them what to do. No one told them how to live. It was the life they built with their own hands, not given, but chosen. Years passed like soft wind. In 1952, Edward's brother George died. He had been king since Edward stepped down. He did what was asked. He followed the rules. And when he passed, Queen Mary, Edward's mother, was still alive. Edward returned to England for a few days. He went alone. Wallace stayed in Paris. She said, "It's your family, not mine." Those words were simple, but full of truth. Wallace never forgot how the royal family had treated her. They didn't accept her. They didn't invite her. They didn't look at her with kindness. She had never been welcome, and even after so many years, she did not forget. Edward walked through Windsor quietly. The gardens, the halls, the rooms where he once played as a child, the halls where he was told, "Be strong, be silent." He remembered the echo of his father's voice, the cold eyes of his mother, the loneliness of being a prince. He did not cry, but he felt something heavy inside. He did not stay long, and when he returned to Paris, he hugged Wallace for a long time. She held his hand and said, "I'm glad you're back." And Edward said, "So am I." Then in 1966, something unexpected happened. They met Queen Elizabeth, the daughter of King George. The meeting was short, at a small party. Just a few people. But something beautiful happened. The young queen looked at Wallace. She smiled. She kissed her cheek and touched her arm gently. Then she turned to Edward and said, "Wallace is so beautiful, Uncle. I think you're a lucky man." Edward smiled. His eyes became wet. Not with sadness, but with soft joy. Later, he wrote, "That day, Elizabeth was kind. She treated us with grace. I will never forget it. But still, I ask myself, why couldn't my mother say those words? Why couldn't my brother? But he didn't stay in that thought for long. He had Wallace, and she was enough. In 1969, they appeared together on television. It was simple, a soft interview. The camera showed them sitting close. Wallace in her favorite dress. Edward smiling quietly. Someone asked, "Do you argue?" Wallace laughed. "No, not really," she said. "But there's one thing I don't like. He's always late. Always. It doesn't matter who he's meeting, a queen, a president, a friend. He can never arrive on time. I've tried to change him, but it's impossible." Edward laughed too. He touched her hand gently. "I know I'm late," he said, "but not on our wedding day. I arrived at the church 20 minutes before you." Wallace smiled. "Yes, that's true," she said, and they both laughed. It was a soft moment, a human moment, not a royal performance, not a cold interview, just two people in love. One newspaper wrote, "You could see real love in their eyes." They forgot the cameras. They forgot the world. They were just two people who had chosen each other, again and again. Wallace became famous for her jewelry. She had pieces from all over the world. Bright stones, beautiful rings, elegant necklaces. People often asked her, "What do you love the most?" She smiled and said, "After my husband, I love my jewelry." And Edward always said, "I give her gifts not just for beauty, but to say thank you. She has given me more happiness than any crown ever could." But then, one day in May 1972, Edward fell sick. His breathing was slow. His hands were cold. The doctor came. He checked his heart. He listened carefully. "Sir," he said, "how many cigarettes do you smoke each day?" Edward gave a tired smile. "About 40 or 50, he said. "But don't ask me to stop. I've smoked for 60 years. I cannot change now." That night, Edward called Wallace into the room. The lights were low. The air was quiet. "I feel tired," he said, "and I feel afraid. But I want you to know, I love you. You have been everything to me. A wife, a friend, a light in the dark. When I die, please take my body back to Windsor. Let me rest there. Will you do that for me?" Wallace could not speak. She held his hand. She nodded, and tears fell from both their eyes. Edward died 1 hour later. 3 days later, a plane arrived in Paris. A blue plane. It was quiet. Simple. Wallace went with it. She brought Edward's body back to England. For the first time, she entered Buckingham Palace. Not as a visitor, not as a stranger, but as his wife. The wife of a man who gave up everything for love. A week later, she returned to France. The house was quiet. The doors were locked. The flowers did not bloom like before. She sat in the dining room every day. She read his love letters. Again and again. Her eyes moved slowly over his words. They were so beautiful, she said. Every word was love. She lived alone for 14 more years. She did not go out. She did not travel. She just waited. Then in 1986, her body became weak. She went to a small hospital near the house. And a few days later, she died. She was buried next to him. In Windsor. In the place that once said no. In the land that once pushed them away. One newspaper wrote, "In life, the Duke and Duchess could not live in Britain. But in death, they rest there together. Side by side. At peace." Chapter 12. Long Live Love. The garden was quiet. The birds were singing. The flowers were open in the morning sun. Edward sat under a tree, with a soft blanket around his legs and a book in his hand. He looked at the trees, but he was not reading. His thoughts were far away. His heart was full of memories. He was older now. His hair had turned white. His back was slower. But his eyes still had the same light. The light of a man who had made one big decision and never regretted it. Wallace came into the garden. She wore a soft green dress. She smiled and gave him a cup of tea. He looked up at her and smiled too. "Do you remember," he asked, "the first time we met?" Wallace laughed gently. "Yes," she said. "You wore brown shoes and black trousers. And I told you they didn't match." He laughed. "Yes. And I thought, this woman tells the truth. I like that." They sat there in silence. Together. Still in love. Still holding hands. Still choosing each other every single day. Edward once said, "Some people think I was wrong. They think I should have kept the crown. They think I should have stayed. But they don't understand what it means to live without love. They don't know what it feels like to be in a palace, with gold and power, and still feel cold inside. Empty. Alone." He remembered his childhood. The big rooms. The long halls. The silent dinners. The teacher with the red nose. The stick that hid his hand when he looked out the window. His father, always serious. His mother, always distant. He remembered the crown on his head. It felt heavy. Not just on his hair, but on his spirit. "I had everything," he said. "I could have had more. But I had nothing real until I met Wallace." He remembered the first time he saw her. The way she smiled. The way she spoke without fear. The way she saw through him. The way she laughed at his clothes. The way she made him feel human. They were married now for over 30 years. And still, he gave her gifts. Necklaces. Rings. Jewels from all over the world. She was famous for her beauty. But Edward always said, "I don't give her diamonds because of how she looks. I give them because of what she gave me, a happy heart." When they sat together in that garden, Edward often looked at her and thought, "I am the luckiest man in the world." Even after all the years, the world had not forgotten their story. Some still called it a scandal. Some still called it a mistake. But more and more people called it what it truly was, a love story. A man who gave up power for peace. A man who walked away from a throne to walk beside the woman who made his heart feel alive. One afternoon, Winston Churchill visited. He sat in the garden with Edward and Wallace. They drank tea. They spoke of old times. And then Winston said something he had once said long ago. "I still believe, sir," he said, "that the best things in life are free." Edward smiled. He nodded. "Yes," he said. "Now I understand those words. You cannot buy joy. You cannot buy love. You cannot buy real connection. It is not in money. Not in gold. Not in crowns. It is in soft mornings and quiet laughter. It is in a hand held in the dark. It is in simple words spoken at the right time. It is in feeling safe. It is in knowing that someone sees you, not for your title, not for your name, but for your soul." As Edward got older, he spent more time in the garden. He wrote letters. He read books. He watched Wallace from across the room and smiled without a word. He looked at her like a man who knew exactly what he had, and exactly what he had walked away from to get it. He said one day, "I think about my life sometimes. I remember being a little boy, alone in a golden room. I remember being hit for looking at the sky. I remember my father's voice telling me I was weak. I remember the war, the blood, the noise, the pain. I remember the day I became king, the music, the shouts, the weight of the world placed on my shoulders. And then, I remember the sound of her voice, the truth in her words, the fire in her eyes. And I remember the moment I knew I would give it all away for one life with her. And he did. In 1972, Edward became very sick. The doctor said, "Sir, it's your heart." Wallace sat by his side every day. She held his hand. She read him his favorite books. She stayed awake while he slept. He opened his eyes one night and said, "I'm afraid, but I'm not alone. You are here, and that's all that matters." Then he looked at her and whispered, "When I die, take me back to Windsor. Let me rest there. Will you promise me that?" She nodded. She kissed his hand. Edward closed his eyes. And that was the last time he spoke. A few days later, his body was taken back to England. Wallace went with it. For the first time, she entered Buckingham Palace. Not as a stranger, not as a scandal, but as a widow, as a wife. She stood in the place that once said no, and now it said nothing. After the funeral, she returned to Paris. Alone, the house was still full of memories, full of books, full of pictures, full of love. She sat in the dining room and read his letters. One by one, slowly, gently. "They were so beautiful," she said. "I read them again and again." She lived 14 more years. But they were quiet years. No more big dinners. No more travel. Just silence. Just memory. Just love that never faded. In 1986, she became sick too. And then she was gone. He was buried next to him. At last. Side by side. A newspaper wrote, "In life, they could not stay in Britain. But in death, they are finally together. Home at last." Edward once said, "You may not understand my choice. You may not agree with it. But I followed my heart. And I do not regret one moment." And so, this story ends not with a crown, not with a throne, but with a garden, with a smile, with two hands held in the sun, with a man who gave up everything and gained everything, and with a final whisper, "Thank God for Wallace." And long, live, love.